Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's session on keeping your children safe online. My name is James, and I am from RM Technology, and we're so pleased to see so many of you here today or just watching the recording back. Thank you very much for booking on. Now, we know that for a busy parent, the digital world can feel like it's moving at 100 miles an hour. Whether it's a new app or the latest headlines about social media, it is tricky to keep up with everything going on. At RM, our heart is putting learners at the centre of everything we do. And we partner with schools from across the country to make sure that technology is a safe and positive tool that enriches their lives. But we know that education doesn't stop at the school gates. That's why we have opened this session up to everyone today. Now, you might not have heard of RM Technology, and that's because we usually work behind the scenes in your children's schools, whether that's providing the infrastructure, the online security, and in providing the devices that help your kids learn every day. While your school leaders are the ones that choose us to be their IT partners, we believe that when you feel confident and empowered at home, your children can get the very best out of the digital world. Now, to help us navigate the digital world, I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker, Alan McKenzie. Alan is a true specialist who has been working in online safety since, I think, 2007. That was before I even left secondary school. What makes Alan different is that he actually lives and breathes this thing. He's an avid gamer, a daily YouTube user, and a social media expert. He speaks to thousands of children and parents every year, so he really understands the reality of what children are seeing and doing online. He isn't here to lecture or to sell to you. This is a really kind of simple, human and practical advice webinar for today. Before I hand over to Alan, just a small bit of housekeeping. We want to keep this as helpful as possible. So if you've got any thoughts or feedback or things for the chat, please put it into the chat window. I know Alan's got so much to go through today, so hopefully we'll cover questions as we go on. If it is time, we'll try and pick those questions, or we can respond to those in an email later. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Alan to get us started.
Thank you very much, James. Let me just share my screen and we will make a start. Just give me the thumbs up if you can see that, James. Perfect. Yep, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and see us this evening. It really is appreciated. James has already introduced me. Thank you very much for that, James. As he says, online safety is what I do. It is all I've done for many, many years now. Does that make me an expert in all the areas of keeping children safe online? No, it absolutely does not. It means I've got lots of experience, and that experience is based on actually talking with students in school, hundreds of thousands of students, their parents, staff, designated safeguarding leads, and so much more as well. And the reason why I call myself a specialist is because I specialize in certain areas. Online safety is just too big an area where anyone can be a so-called expert. We specialize in particular areas. So for me, I specialize in certain areas. For example, one of the areas I specialize is due to my work with Lincolnshire Police, where I assist them in a department called POLITS being the Paedophile Online Investigations Team. So I specialise in aspects of safeguarding children from that respect, and also bringing suspects and offenders to account for their actions. That's not really an area I'm going to be going into as part of this talk. It's a very in-depth and obviously quite a traumatizing aspect as well. But on that, I will try to cover off as much as I can, and particularly in relation to some things which are very topical and in the media, right now. So the focus of this particular talk is on young people, and we had the primary age children, the parents of those children, just about 30 minutes ago. So my head's all over the place trying to transition from primary to secondary at the moment. But those adolescent years, we all know they are the most difficult years of all. We've all been through those, and now you add in the aspects of the online world into parenting, and it just makes that more and more difficult. So James is absolutely right where he says, I'm not here to judge. Who am I to judge? I made plenty of mistakes as a parent, with my boys when they were younger. The point I'm trying to make here is that there's a lot of pressure, I think, on parents and carers to be perfect, especially with a lot of the media reports which come out and are very judgmental towards parents. And I disagree with that. You've already got a hard enough job as it is. For me, it's not about being perfect. It's just about doing your best and learning from any mistakes that are made. That's what we do as parents. There's no guide to, guidebook or anything to any of this, especially the online world. And like I say, that those adolescent years are the most difficult years of all. They're the very years when our children are starting to move out of that child age into that more out there age where socializing with their friends is more important than it has ever been. And for some young people, their friends are to a degree more important than their parents are. Our young people will not necessarily get into those deeper conversations with us, especially if it's something that they might have difficulty talking with us, especially about perhaps growing up or mental health issues or whatever it is. The adolescent years are, our brains are designed, that those years are designed to take risks and push boundaries. That's just what we do. And a really, really important part of this is that development of the brain, which is what adolescence is all about. And a big aspect of that is this part of the brain here, the frontal lobe, sometimes known as the seat of good judgment. So it's where we start to learn those judgment and critical thinking skills, which are going to take us through into adulthood. And what's interesting about this particular aspect is that the frontal lobe, the seat of good judgment, is the last part of the brain to develop fully into what we call maturity. Now, that's an interesting one because in law, we describe maturity as the age of 18. 18 is adulthood. But as far as brain development is concerned, maturity is around about the mid-20s. Or if you ask my wife, it's not even at 59. But it's one thing to take into consideration, because whilst we're talking about young people, we're also talking about young adults. In other words, understanding the consequences of what they're doing, the risks that they're taking. You can apply that to lots and lots of different things. For example, young car drivers is a classic example of that. Good judgment skills and consequences of actions. So it does make this aspect a particularly difficult and challenging and frustrating one of all, which is why I say that the online safety, keeping our children, our young people safe online in particular, isn't just a job for you. It's much more nuanced than that. So, for example, we've got education, and for this I mean education at school. Your child or your children will have received education from year one, and that goes all the way through to college years. It's statutory, and they cover a lot. Believe you me, they cover a lot. That's why I and people like me get called into schools, just to give that extra specialist knowledge on certain areas. But with that, of course, we do need that parent support as well. We need to be there for to help them, to guide them, to push them back onto the right track when it's necessary to do so. And at the end of the day, we can't keep an eye on our children 24/7. That would be impossible. So there are tools available to us which we can either choose to use or not use, or use a little bit of them as well. So that would take you into things like internet filters and apps on your devices where you can monitor what your children are doing and turn off screen time, and all sorts of other things. What I generally tend to find, and this is quite general, what I generally tend to find is that when these children are getting older, as they're starting to move through those secondary phases, is that parents start turning those parental tools off, or just bringing them down a little bit. And what I will say is there's no right or wrong answer to any of that. Should I use parental tools with my children or not? I can't answer that on your behalf. I never used parental tools with my two boys. I never felt the need to do that, and that's because we had quite a close relationship. I knew they would come to me if something was wrong. I knew if I saw a behavior or a relationship change within them, that something wasn't quite right, and I just needed to carefully investigate what was going on. But with that said, many parents do use parental tools, and I think that's fabulous. That is your decision. So what I want to do is just very, very quickly, before I get into the main crux of the part, is one of the biggest questions I get is, or one of the biggest frustrations that parents feel is, well, what's available to me? I've got all these devices, and I've got Wi-Fi via the home broadband, and they're using all of these online services, and all of these apps and everything else. Where do I actually start? What do I? It's overwhelming. Technology moves fast, and apps are coming out all the time, and new games, and everything else. Where do I start with all of this? Your answer to that, and your answer to a lot of questions, most of the questions that you will have, are on a website called internetmatters.org. I am absolutely sure many of you are already aware of that, and some of you may well have investigated what's on there. What's on there is a lot, but one of the most useful things is what's called the Family Digital Toolkits. Now, this is really simple, but it is incredibly useful. If you don't know where to start, if you don't know, what should I be doing on this? So with all of these devices and everything else, this is your great starting point, the digital toolkit. It's incredibly simple, and it is incredibly quick as well, and it's free, which is even better. There are 7 questions, and as you can see up there, it takes 8 minutes. Literally, it took me 3 minutes to go through it just the other day to prepare the screenshots for this. So basically, what you do is you input. First of all, I'm not going to show you all the screenshots. I just want this to be very quick. First of all, you can stick in there how many children you've got, and the reason for that is, say, for example, you've got a 6-year-old and a 13-year-old. You obviously want different advice and guidance dependent on the ages of those particular children. So it means that you can be guided to slightly different resources based on their age, or whether they're neurodivergent or whatever it is. So it tries to split that up. So how many children would you like advice for? And then for each of those children, whether you've got 1, 10, whatever it is, you can then pick certain aspects as a part of this. So, for example, I've picked on there, my child has additional needs, and then for the second child, I've put non-apply. You can put pretty much whatever you want within those tick boxes. And again, it's to give you that tailored advice and guidance. Then it will ask you what sorts of activities do you want support for? In other words, what are your children doing mostly online? Or it might be, what is concerning you most? This type of thing. So where would I like guidance? What can you point me to as a part of this? And at the end of those 7 questions, this is essentially what you get. It's basically a PDF. I've just given you 2 sides, excuse me, to one PDF on here. So what this has done is tailored the advice and guidance, and basically given you a bunch of links which will take you back to the Internet Matters website, which will give you the support and guidance on that particular aspect. So that particular aspect might be, I'm having problems with my child gaming online. That's just spending so much time on there. How can you help me with this? It might be, how do I put parental settings on an Apple phone, or a Nintendo Wii, or a PlayStation 4, or anything like this? So it gives you those links, and my advice here would be, just start slowly. You've got to start somewhere, but just take it slow. You get a lot of links, and you don't have to do it all at once. Just pick what is important to you. And even if you've got no intention of using parental controls, just go through this to see what's on there, what's available for you, and what advice can you get which comes within the age range of your child. And the reason I say that is it's always a case of how do you know what you don't know? So what else is out there do you think that I need to know about? And like I say, it is a fabulous resource. Not only that, there's lots of other advice on there about certain apps and internet filters and content filters and all sorts of other things as well. So again, one of the common questions I get is what apps can I put on my my boy's device or my girl's device so I can keep an eye on what's going on out there. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of them. There really are. Internet Matters has quite a few of them on there. And the reason why I personally don't pick any out are because it's really dependent on your particular needs, your unique needs within your household and you and your children. But what I would say is, if you are looking at putting some sort of content restrictions or some way of keeping an eye on what your child is doing on their device, is have a look at through these because they all come with different, slightly different, and in some cases unique features. So again, it's about picking what's best for you. However, one thing I would say, and it's a really important one, is all of these, apart from the bottom left there, the Google Family link, all of these are paid for services. Some of them you do get free trials and that sort of thing. So, you can you can have a trial and see if it's any good for your child, but please do bear that in mind. They are all commercial services. All Internet Matters is doing is pointing you to say these are the types of things that are available. I'm not going to recommend one, but what I will say is that year on year, from what I review, the one at the top left there, the Custodio, that tends to come out with top marks year on year. So it's probably one of the first ones to look at. But like I say, please do bear in mind, they all cost money, which is why I don't want to go into any further depth. But with that said, you've also got individual features within some social media apps there. And again, I'm sure many of you are already aware of this. So for example, on the TikTok app, which many young people use, you've got a feature called family pairing. So essentially what that means is you can create a TikTok account and pair that account with your child's TikTok account, and then that gives you access to a limited number of features. So things like managing the screen time, applying a restricted mode, which restricts the type of content that they are seeing, direct messages, in other words, private messages, do you allow them or not, and those types of things as well. And TikTok and other apps as well already have inbuilt default privacy and safety settings. So for example, where they age estimate that someone is between 13 and 15, bear in mind that you need to be 13 to use the vast majority of these apps. So where they age estimate someone is between 13 and 15, they will default apply certain features on there. So it is private. In other words, people can't search or just accidentally come across your child. And you can choose who can comment, such as, actual friends or no one at all. That everyone setting is removed, which gives a level of comfort. It's not a solution, not by a long shot, but it is a level of comfort that some of the risks have been mitigated in some way. Features in apps such as Snapchat, which is far more restricted. So again, they've got their family center where you can view who your teen's friends are. So if you're concerned about your child being contacted or communicating with people that they don't actually know, you can look through and just see who those people are, and if they anyone they don't recognize or you don't recognize, you can have a chat with your child to see who, if they actually know those people and other things as well. So the point I'm trying to make is there are lots of features and parental management controls and all sorts of things out there. It is overwhelming because they're all slightly different, and not all apps and games and such like have any of these features. Some have a few limited features, others have more than others. So use that resource from Internet Matters just to really hone in on what your concerns are, the age of your children, and what their needs are. So I don't want to go any further into that. The area that I really want to concentrate on for the rest of this particular talk is more to do with behavior influence. Now, why this? The reason being is because it's a very, very topical area right now. And the reason I say that is because there can be, and I don't mean this from parents, but there can be a lot of judgment on teenagers, adolescents in particular, for things that they are doing online. But the reality is, when you speak to these young people, when I speak to these young people, a lot of them are saying, but we have no control over this. I've got no control over people that contact me. I've got no control over the fact that I've just seen this particular content, this vile, horrible, inappropriate stuff that's coming through on my feed. There's this thing about control, especially on social media, over what our children are seeing. And so the reality is they don't have an awful lot of control at all. And dependent on what it is that they're seeing can influence their behavior. Children, young people can be influenced by lots of things, as can adults. It might be family life, it might be their social circles, but online in particular is a big one. And what we're starting to see right now is more and more legislation coming out around the world in relation to these influencing factors that are essentially being pushed towards our children, and they are being compelled to do things that perhaps they wouldn't have done if this sort of thing wasn't in place. And this sort of thing, I'll come on to explain that in just a moment. So why do I mention this? The reason being, as I mentioned previously, is it can be quite easy to say to a child, why are you looking at this? Why did you see this? Why are you talking at this person? Lots of these why questions where the honest answers coming back from young people is we don't really have that control. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to see these pictures. I didn't ask for that old bloke to contact me. And not only that is when we talk, you'll know this, as well as I do, if you've got particularly younger teachers, talking at them does nothing. If anything, it puts up barriers. And what I found over the years is when I'm giving these types of talks to young people in particular, it's more about helping them understand why things are happening and the way in which these things work. And the reason for that is it helps them to understand why they're seeing that content, why they're getting that contact for other people, so that they can make the right decisions for themselves. So particularly when children are growing up, what I mean by that is that it's important we start to share with them the information so that they can make decisions, so that they can understand consequences of actions. So behavior influence, what do I mean by that? One of the most simplistic ones of all is simple social engineering tactics. Social engineering is incredibly simple, and the ways of social engineering in themselves are very simple, and they work. Just a really simplistic example on here is shopping websites, for example. Hurry, only 42 left in stock, 5 sold in the last 5 hours, 25 hours, and all of these sorts of things. These sorts of things are designed to create a sense of urgency and a sense of curiosity. That they're elements of social engineering. Well, if they're in low stock and I want those white boots, for example, I should buy them now before they go out of stock. really, really simple examples of social engineering. And these are the things that are being pushed out to all of us. You know, the internet has basically, or the World Wide Web, I should say, has basically turned from what it was originally designed for, which was all about that social connection and education and, you know, all sorts of things. It's now essentially one huge commercial enterprise. And there's, you know, don't get me wrong, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. It's always the way it was going to go. But for me, the things that concern me is the way that it's going, the way that these things are being pushed at us and really trying to manipulate us in some way to make decisions that we wouldn't necessarily have made otherwise. So social engineer is one aspect, but the ones I really want to concentrate on as part of this are basically two of the psychological aspects and two of the technical aspects. So disinhibition, parasocial, algorithms, and persuasive design. Now, where does this fit into the whole risk landscape for children? It fits in sort of like this. So in education, we use what we call the 4 Cs because, excuse me, there's no definitive list of risks and issues, never has been and never will be. A lot of them that we're aware of, you know, inappropriate contact, inappropriate content, children doing things online that they wouldn't ordinarily do. That's the conduct. And then the commercial aspects of things like things being sold to us, identity theft, fraudulent activity, you know, all of these sorts of things. So what we do is we categorize into what we call the 4 Cs, because we'll never know all of the risks. You know, I don't know all of the risks, and I've been doing this for many, many years, but categorizing them can help them. So the behavioral aspects fit into these quite nicely. The reality is you could put all of the behavioral aspects into all of these, but just to give you an idea, algorithms that are feeding content to our children, algorithms that are feeding people that our children don't know, feeding them. Or you might know this person's got the same hobbies as you have, perhaps you want to connect this person. Conduct, social engineering again. So I'm going to go through all of these as a part of this. Sorry if I'm waffling a little bit, but I'm going to make all of this more clear in just a moment. Just for the point of this, when it comes to risks to our children, we categorize into the 4 Cs: content, contact, conduct, and commerce. So the first one, online disinhibition. What is it? Online disinhibition is something that was that's been studied over and over and over. For me, it's a fascinating subject, and it's basically the study of why some people might behave behind a screen than they would in real life towards another person, given certain circumstances. So, for example, circumstances could be things like anger or fear or frustration, or, you know, these types of things. It might be the particular person that's very introverted or very extroverted. So online disinhibition is all about how we, not just young people, but we as a whole, act when we are behind a screen. And personally, I find it fascinating. Very, very simplistically, there are generally 8 what they call ingredients to online disinhibition. These 3 I've put up here are the most common ones that I come across. So online disinhibition is all about our brain, our frontal lobe, failing to make good judgments and understanding consequences. And for a lot of that, it's because we are not physically in front of someone. So say for example, let's say for example, we were talking face to face in a school, for example, and I traveled 3 hours to get to you, and I'd had a horrible journey, absolutely traffic everywhere. You know, it was just an awful journey. And I arrived at the school, and I'm in an absolutely foul mood. And we start talking, and there's a couple of people mumbling in the corner, and I just want to shout, "Shut up!" You know, or whatever it is. You know, I'm just in that frame of mind, and I want to shout this out, But a few milliseconds before those words come out of my mouth, my brain says, no, Alan, you can't do that, because there will be consequences if you do that. And the reason it's able to make that judgment is because I can see you. And more importantly, my brain can judge, if I say this, what reaction will I get? And I know it won't be a good reaction. So it doesn't come, those words don't come out of my mouth. But when I'm behind a screen, can't see that. My brain is making judgment calls just based on experience rather than anything else, because I can't see you. Everyone's got their cameras turned up. I can't see your facial expressions. I can't see who's on camera. So essentially, I'm here talking to myself, which is what I do a lot, apparently, according to my wife. So that's essentially what online disinhibition is all about. And the ingredients, the most common ones are anonymity. No one knows it's me. So again, this is a subconscious process. Invisibility, people can't see me. Dissociative imagination, well, it's online. It's not real life. So it's not really going to affect someone. It's just online. There are two main aspects to this, what's called the benign and the toxic aspect. So benign is where people are sharing or doing things with no harmful intention behind it. So to give you an example, it might be somebody that is quite introverted in real life. They keep themselves to themselves. They've got a few friends, and they're just a normal everyday person. But online, then they start sharing lots of information. They really become quite extroverted. They help lots of people. They socialize with lots of people. There's no harmful intent behind that. That's why it is benign, but there can be consequences. Those consequences can be reputational consequences. It could be the fact that we're sharing so much information. Anybody could put that information, particularly a criminal, a fraudster, in order to gather, well, what is it, your real name? What is your date of birth? Where do you live? And then we've got consequences of identity theft and fraud, and even down to things like exploitation, where predators, offenders in particular, they are looking for those bits of information where a young person might be vulnerable in some way. So for example, somebody that posts online that I hate my parents, or I'm having difficulties, I'm depressed, or I'm socially anxious, or whatever it is, that's exactly what offenders are looking for. They're looking for those little snippets which would suggest a vulnerability in some way. And that's the way that they make their way in, by capitalizing on that vulnerability. And then we've got toxic disinhibition, where there is the intention of harm. So two quite different aspects on there. So that toxic disinhibition could be things like I've got up here, spreading rumors about other people, doxing them. In other words, finding out all of their personal information and putting it all out there about them, and misinformation and all sorts of other things. It could be language, or actions which could be deemed violent or misogynistic, or even inappropriate, and even illegal content as well. So the consequences of that are probably quite obvious. Then we've got things like reputational risk all over again, potential for their career in the future. And even, in some circumstances, if they've broken the law, and the police turn up on the doorstep, or it could be, sort of on the wall a bit. Is it inappropriate or is it illegal? And the school get involved, and all sorts of other things start to happen. So online disinhibition is a big aspects, and essentially what it means is people don't always realize that when they are behind a screen, the brain can't always make good judgment calls, which is why in primary school, from about year 3 upwards, we teach children a very, very simple message. And that message is think before you post, because all it needs is just that 2 to 3 seconds to think, if I do this, what are the consequences behind that? And that's part of the problem, is when you're behind a screen, it can be quick, it can be fast paced. So just taking that extra couple of seconds to think about it Put the phone down perhaps and just think about what are the consequences behind this. That is all we need to do. And then onto things like parasocial relationships. Now, again, this is a really, well, they're all really interesting ones. They are to me anyway. I don't know if you find them interesting, but parasocial relationships, again, is an interesting one. Now, whereas online disinhibition, the studies for that really only started in 2002 by Professor John Suler from the United States. Parasocial relationships is something that's been known for years and years, ever since the invention of the radio, quite frankly. And that parasocial relationships is the illusion of a two-way friendship. That's basically what it is. So what do I mean by that? Well, you think about the YouTubers and the TikTok influence, for example, that your children are watching on their devices. These influencers, those YouTubers, they give that impression, that illusion of a two-way relationship, whereas the reality is it is a one-way relationship. And by them saying and doing the things that they say and they do, it creates this impression, this illusion that we are friends, or we know that person because they're sharing personal information, they're sharing how they make money, they're sharing the best bits of their life. So this illusion is created that that person is a friend, and in some cases, certainly not all, it's not always deliberate, but in some cases it's basically used to bypass defenses and exploit to an extent, and for the most part that exploitation is for commercial purposes. So again, it's a really big one, especially for example, if you look at if you saw the TV program Adolescence, which was just absolutely fabulous. It really was. If you looked at some of the contents that boys are in particular are saying that they're seeing and hearing about in relation to things like toxic masculinity, for example, they are being influenced by what these people are saying, because these people tend to they talk quite well, really well in some cases, and they are really appealing to the struggles that young people have. And so, from a child and a young person's perspective, they'll say that they get me. This is exactly what I'm going through. So I trust this person, and there you go. Trust. I trust this person. But what they don't always realize is that illusion is for commercial purposes. It's to get them to buy something. It might be a product placement. It could be an online, service, whatever it is. But it's essentially a commercial aspect. It's all about making money. And then we've got persuasive design. Now, this is one where a lot of people talk about addiction. And personally, I'm not really a fan of that. I completely get why people use the word addiction, but it's not addiction in its true sense. For me, it's more about compulsion. So, for example, you've got young people that just seem to spend hours scrolling through on TikTok, and there's just no end point to it at all. That you can scroll for hours, days, months, years, and there is no end to that. There are nudge techniques to nudge you into taking a particular action, especially in games. That's a big one, especially in games, but in social media as well. And then you've got algorithms that are feeding content to us, and I'll come on to algorithms in just a moment. Now, persuasive design, like all of these, are really, really simple. Persuasive design in particular is simple because for persuasive design to work correctly, it only needs three things. And that's these three things here: motivation, ability, and trigger. So let me show you a very quick and a very simple example of what I mean by that. So here's an example of a photograph that I took of a dog. You can probably see I like my photography here. So I took a photograph. This was a friend's dog, and he asked me to take a photo of it. And then I posted it online to social media, to Instagram in a particular, and you can see, being transparent, you can see what I put up there. So what motivated me to do that? What motivates other people to post when you know online to various apps and websites and things? Well, motivation, it could be anything. But these tend to be the main ones. I'm posting it because I want my friends and family to see it, or I'm posting it because it feels good, or I'm posting it maybe because I want to show off, you know, in some way, because I'm, you know, really proud of this and I just want to show it off to others. There might be a commercial aspect, or it might be because I want to influence, you know, in some way. So that's the motivation. And then there's the ability. This is the easiest one of all. The ability is it's got to be easy to use or do. And that comes down to what's called the UX, or the design, for example, the design of the app. To give you a very, very simplistic example of that, when an app is designed, I've got to think about the most used features, the most common features on here have got to be somewhere close to my thumb, for example, because if it's all the way up here when I can't get to it, that's going to get really frustrating very, very quickly, and I'm going to stop using it. Equally, if it takes me 10 minutes just to post a photo online, well, that's no good to me. There's other apps that I can do it in, you know, 10 to 15 seconds. So the ability, it's got to be easy to use and it's got to be designed well. And then the bigger one. So we've got the motivation, the ability, but the big one. The big one is the trigger. The trigger is, as you can see up on here, I've posted this image, I've put a bit of text into Instagram along with a few hashtags, I've posted it. The trigger is all the notifications I'm getting back. So to explain persuasive design from the perspective of a company is all about how do we get more people in here? How do we keep them in here for longer? How do we keep them coming back over and over again? How do we keep them coming back? That's your trigger, your notification. Notifications are designed, one of their purposes is not only to notify us of something, obviously, but it's to get us back into the app. So those triggers could be, you know, multiple things. Notifications, you know, visible in the app on the screen. It could be an audible ping. It could be vibrating. It could even be an email. You know, so for example, if you got one like on your post, potentially, and I say potentially, you're going to get 5, 6, 7 notifications for that one like. You times that by 100. You times that by 1,000. Now all of a sudden you've got all of these notifications coming in. And the whole point of all these notifications, or one of the points I should say, of all these notifications is to get you back into that app, to get you scrolling, to see more ads. That's the point. And again, it is a commercial aspect of the way in which the economy of apps works. The economy of most apps is all about the advertising within those apps. And that is a big one. And then on top of that, you've got the algorithms, and now this is a really, really topical one right now, and it's a big one. So algorithms are all about recommender feeds. That's what I mean by that. I'm just concentrating on recommendation systems here. So for example, YouTube, what am I being recommended in YouTube, and why am I being recommended this stuff? In TikTok, in Instagram, in whatever it is, why am I being shown this content? I didn't follow this content. Why am I being shown this vile stuff, or this stuff here that I'm not interested in? Why am I getting all of that? It's down to recommender systems, algorithms. So you'll be aware there are lots and lots of features within apps, and these are just some of those features. These are the more common ones. So recording and posting, sharing, messaging, liking, commenting, you know, the age-old things we all know about. But what's also interesting is some of these features are also quite powerful. For example, liking something. What does a like actually mean? Does it mean I just like that image? Does it mean I like that person? The reality is it actually means a lot. It might mean I like it, or it's funny, or it's attractive, or I support it, or I fancy you, or more people should see this, I want you to notice me, and all sorts of other things. That one simple feature, that one function has multiple aspects to it. And one of the more concerning ones is I share something because it's shocking or infuriating. Let me give you an example. I remember being in a secondary school not too long ago, and there were a group of students that got into trouble with the school and with their parents, obviously, as well. And one of them got into trouble with the police as well. And that's because they shared something which was, I'm not going to say what it was because it was something that was quite vile. And when I said to them, why did you share this? You know, what led you into doing this? There were two aspects to it. One was because my friend shared it with me, so therefore I felt I had to share it with other people. I felt compelled to do that because it was my friend. The other reason was because it was really, really bad. And that was a thing. And that's what you see all the time, especially with adults on platforms such as Facebook, where they go, I've seen this in my feed. This is really, really bad. More people need to see this, rather than I've seen this. This is really, really bad. Nobody should be seeing this. Therefore, I'm not going to share it. And that's where the algorithms take a stranglehold in some way, because they'll say, well, you've liked that, you've shared that, so now you're going to see more of it. And all that is based on what are called interest signals. Now, interest signals are lots and lots of different things, but basically what they are is a signal to the algorithm to say, send me more of this stuff. So whether that's misogynistic content, whether that is sexual content, whether that's content about my favorite online game, you know, whatever it is, the algorithm says, you want to see more of that stuff, then right, that's what you're going to get. And it's all about the flow of the algorithm. To give you, again, my apologies, all of these are very, very simple examples, but with a point because we don't have an awful lot of time. And so the algorithm flow, I'll give you a really simplified example of TikTok's algorithm flow here. So somebody posts a video onto TikTok and they put a title, maybe some hashtags, you know, whatever. So as that video is being posted, there is software in the background which is sort of analyzing that, you know, what's it all about, you know, all this sort of thing. And then very, very importantly, it makes a prediction who wants to see this. So based on their past interest signals, what audience is this going to go out to? So it's then published to those users. It's published to those users and it gets a performance rating, which gives a rating ratio. Let me explain that. So the performance rating is this. So if somebody rewatches a video, so for example, they're scrolling past and they go, oh, that's quite good. And then keep scrolling and go, oh no, I'm going back to that. I'm going to rewatch that again. That's a big signal to the algorithm that you want to see more of that stuff. If you get to the end of the video, if you share the video, if you comment on it and you like it, so all of this goes into a rating ratio. And basically what happens is if that rating ratio is good, then it goes back through all over again. Let's predict more audience, let's predict more users, push it out to them, rate the performance again, put it back through the ratio, and then it goes round and round and round and keeps going round until no one's really watching it anymore. No one's getting to the end. No one's liking it. No one's sharing it. And then it comes to an end and it's not getting shared anymore. That is how quickly and how easy something goes viral. The more shocking, in some cases, not all cases, but the more shocking, the more infuriating, they are pretty much guaranteed to keep going round this cycle because people are going, this is really, really bad. More people need to see this, rather than this is really, really bad. Nobody should be seeing this. And it's all based on those interest signals. Now, there was a study, there's been lots and lots of studies carried out in relation to algorithms, but one in particular that I really liked goes all the way back to 2023, carried out by an organization called Revealing Reality. And it was a very small study. I think there's only about 23 young people, so it's a very small in terms of scale. But what they were particularly looking at was in relation to children who may have some vulnerabilities, and studying what was Snapchat. So it was Snapchat particular. What is Snapchat feeding to you, and how are you actually using Snapchat? And basically, this was the bullet points. This was the summary of what the report came out with. So most of these young people were saying that Snapchat is basically used like a local news app, and as part of that, they're seeing in their local extended area, they're seeing things like fights and stabbings and people's reputations being destroyed and all sorts of other things, going on. And what most of these young people were saying was, I don't want to see this stuff. I don't. Why am I seeing this stuff? I don't have any control over that. But from a parent's perspective, I'm not saying you would, by the way, but from a parent's perspective, you might look at that and go, why are you watching this? That is a natural parent reaction. But what a lot of young people is saying, like I said earlier, I've got no control over that. I don't know why I'm seeing this stuff. And that's a big part of it. When you take it to the extreme where algorithms can have a particular influence on somebody, that really can be taken to the extreme, to the most horrible situations, the most horrible consequences. Just one, which is why I say this is a topical subject right now. Just one of those, you may well be aware of Molly Russell, who was a bright, lovely young lady, according to her dad. You may have watched the program that was on Channel 4 last Thursday called Molly versus the Machines. If you haven't watched that, it's well worth a watch. It's on catch up on Channel 4. I've seen lots of parents who said they're going to sit down and watch it with their children. I would advise caution on that. I personally would say watch it yourself first, and then if you feel that it's appropriate for your child, then watch it with your children, so that you can discuss through these issues. The coroner was quite rightly very critical towards tech companies in relation to their use of algorithms and pushing content at young people in particular that they really shouldn't be seeing. And he is absolutely right by that. And the reason I say that is, one, for that very reason. They just shouldn't be seeing this type of content. In this case, it was self-harm and suicide type of content, but in another case, to manipulate or manage that algorithm in some way is really quite difficult, and there isn't a huge amount you can do about it, but there are some things, and this goes back to teaching young people, and obviously you being aware yourselves of, given this situation, what can we do about this? Well, when it comes to algorithms, there are a couple of things, and it really is only a couple. For example, on some apps, such as TikTok, such as YouTube, you've got a feature, and I've highlighted these with the two red arrows, as you can see. You've got a feature called Not Interested. So basically what that is, it is a signal to the algorithm to say, I don't want to see this sort of stuff, please. Thank you very much. Now, on TikTok, I've tested this, and on TikTok, it really works quite well. You might have to press not interested on a few bits of content, and then it gets the message. On YouTube, not so well, but it does work. It can be quite useful to you. What I tend to find, especially when I'm talking with young people, is if you are seeing, or if you've started seeing content that you just don't want to see, the only realistic, practical thing that you can do is start liking content that you're actually interested in. And what that does is that in one way overwhelms it. Again, it signals back to the algorithm, come back on track. This is the type of stuff that I actually want to see. So, for example, if your children are watching YouTube videos, right, that's totally appropriate for me. That's the sort of stuff I want to see. I'm going to like that, because that like isn't about telling the YouTuber I liked your video. It's about telling the algorithm I want to see more of this stuff. And it's the same on TikTok. This is not a feature which is available on all apps. Just to be clear about that. That's why it's so difficult. And it's why I say the only practical resolution to this is to give our young people the advice that if your feed has somehow gone skew-if, or if you don't like what you're seeing or whatever it is, just start liking content that you are actually interested in and that you do want to see. And what that does is that brings that algorithm back on track. And the reality is, ladies and gents, is that is all you can do when it comes to that. But the point behind all of this is you put all of these aspects together: the parasocial relationships, your disinhibition, your algorithms, your persuasive design, your social engineering, and essentially you've got a perfect storm here. And what I mean by that is something I said right at the very beginning. When I speak to children and young people, a lot of them are saying, I don't know why I'm seeing this stuff. I don't want to see this stuff. I don't want to be contacted by these people, but I don't seem to have control over it. I don't really know what it is that I'm doing, why is this going wrong? So this is why I say, in some ways, coming back to the very beginning of the talk, is that those parents management features can help to a degree, and they really can. Some of them can help to a degree. But what's also important is we need to be having those conversations, as difficult as they can be sometimes, with our young people, to really try and to get into this and talk to them, especially if you're worried about things such as, my son has started to talk about things in quite misogynistic ways, or whatever it is. We need to delve down and have those, like I say, sometimes very, very difficult conversation with our young people to really try and get them to open up and really discuss this on, a level that you and they are happy with. So difficult conversations in themselves are quite difficult. I mean, teenagers, I know teenagers, and again, I don't mean to be judgmental towards teenagers. That is just a whole part of the growing up process. Particularly through those adolescent years, where those conversations can quite often be very, very difficult, and they don't want to talk at all. They'd rather talk with their friends or whatever it is. But just to give you a couple of tips around this, first of all, and don't get, again, I'm not being judgmental. This is a really difficult aspect, but sometimes we get so frustrated and so angry. Our questioning comes across as more of an accusation. What have you been doing? Why did you do that? How did you see that? Right, give me your phone. You're not having this. You're banned for a week. To young people who say that they don't necessarily have control over what they're seeing, that's a punishment for which they've had no control over. Now, don't get me wrong, there are perfectly, lots and lots of times when, that phone, that device, that PlayStation, whatever it is, does need to be taken away. But the whole point of me giving this talk to you is to say that it's not always the fault of the young person. In fact, quite often it isn't the fault of young person. So if you can, do take that step back. Do take that step back, because the last thing you want is for that young person to build up that brick wall and go straight into self-protection mode, because at that point, no conversation is going to work. Absolutely none at all. Instead, it's about curiosity. Even if you're worried about something, it's really more about the way in which you are presenting your questions to your child. And a really important one part of that is, it's not about having the big talk. It's all about little and often. It's about asking them about their experiences. What do you experience online? Why do you think that happened? I heard about this from somebody else. Have you heard about that? What do young people generally tend to think about this? If I could do something better, or if adults in general could do something better, what do you think it would be? How can I support you a bit more on this? And essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to open up that relationship to a point where if something is going wrong or has gone wrong, that your child has better instincts to come to you for help and guidance and support rather than going online for that help, guidance and support, because that's not always a good idea. Now, don't get me wrong, for some young people, that online world is an absolute lifeline for them for conversations or help and guidance that they really, really need, but they're not conversations they can have for whatever reason with other people. That can be an absolute lifeline for those young people. But what we want to try and instill is for them to come to us to, and to have those very conversations. And a really key point in that is try not to do it face to face, which I know sounds ridiculous, but if we have those conversations, especially if they're difficult ones, that can be quite a barrier for a young person. They feel under an awful lot of pressure. So what I hear from a lot of parents is that they might have that conversation on the school run, for example. So the child's in the back seat or they're next to them and you're not having that eye contact. So it takes away that pressure of the eyes going in the air, or whatever it is. It might be that you're out on a walk one day, or you're taking the dog for a walk, or you're in the kitchen, or whatever it is. It's about slipping those conversations in, not saying, right, we're sitting down, we're talking about this now. Sometimes it does get to that point, don't get me wrong, but don't start off with that. This is your starting point right here. So my final advice to you, ladies and gents, I've just noticed again, I've gone slightly over. My apologies. My final advice on here is having that good parent support in place, and that's part of the advice I've given you there. Is telling your children, your teenagers, that I'm always here for you. You can come and talk to me about anything, but do you know what? If there's something that you can't talk to me about, then you've got your auntie your auntie Phil, your uncle Phil, your auntie Angela. Whatever it is, it's about giving them options as well, to say you don't necessarily need to come to me, but please go to somebody. You've always got somebody to talk to. It's also about us modeling good behavior. Very, very important, that, because young people are going to get a lot of their habits from us. And if they see you doing something that you've told them not to do, then they're just going to copy that. That's teenagers all over. Young people have got to develop good digital skills, because for many of them, not all, many of them, but that is their career in the future. Digital will come into it in some way. So they've got to have the good digital skills. And the final one is, when it comes to screen time, I get a lot of questions around screen time. Time can be, and most definitely is, quite often an issue. Don't get me wrong, it absolutely is. But what is more important is screen use. That is much more important. What are they doing? And most importantly of all, why are they doing it? Unless you sort those two out, you will never ever sort out the time. My son is spending too long playing his game, spending too long scrolling through TikTok, whatever it is. Why? Why is that happening? Okay. That is what you need to find out before you sort the time. Time is a factor, yes, but you have to sort the screen use out first. Whew. Ladies and gents, that brings me to the end. It was quite fast paced. I'm sorry for that, but I did want to try and squeeze quite a lot in, but not so much that it was overwhelming. And I hope it wasn't overwhelming. I am absolutely certain there are things that I haven't covered that maybe you wanted me to cover. That's simply a time thing. But as James said earlier, there are opportunities where we can perhaps have more of these in future. But please do go to Internet Matters and have a look on there, because they have got a lot of bang up to date, practical, pragmatic advice and guidance specifically for parents. Ladies and gents, thank you very much for taking the time tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. I think I speak for everyone when I say having such a practical, honest advice makes the digital world feel a lot less daunting. Online safety can be a real juggle to keep up with, but I certainly personally will be taking Alan's advice on board tonight. If you found today useful, please do look out for a follow-up email. We'll share some of the key takeaways and links to further resources to help you continue these conversations at home. Thank you all for your time on your busy Mondays to join us. We really hope you found it valuable, and we wish you and your families a safe and happy week online. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.